So recently my wife found this funky little password vault at a thrift store for $5, and after taking a look online we were pretty sure this definitely had some significant security vulnerabilities. And sure enough, we did find at least one article that said these things were definitely not secure. You can see that in the comments, even on Amazon, people have recently purchased this this year, so it's definitely still being used. So how are we going to get the data off this thing? Well, it has a flash memory chip called SPI, Serial Peripheral Interface, and that is holding all the juicy data that we need to access. So we're going to have to communicate with that thing with an external device. So let's talk about a couple of the important pins on this chip that we're going to need to communicate with. The black thing there is VSS, it's a ground. SCLK is the actual clock, so we're going to need to send pulses for the timing of the communication. CS is the chip selector. SI is the input. SO is the output. VCC is going to be our power source because, like I said, we're going to have to power this externally. I'm going to use a Raspberry Pi to communicate with this. It is actually a really cool device that you can use for all kinds of projects. It has these GPIO pins that allow you to communicate with sensors and things like that. And we'll go ahead and go over some of the things that we're going to have to use, some of the pins we're going to have to use to make this happen. So the first one is the chip select. This actually talks to the chip to let it know that we're going to be communicating back and forth. We have the clock one I talked about, this GPIO 11 SCLK, sends pulses for the timing. We have this master input, slave output, and then we're also going to have a master output, slave input. So we're communicating with this master slave way where there can be simultaneous input and output. And it's going to have a 3-volt power source that's within the range listed on the data sheet. So I'm going to go ahead and take out the batteries because we don't want anything overriding our power supply from the Pi for our communication. So after taking out these super annoying rubber things, I was able to unscrew it with some random glasses screwdriver that I found. Here is the actual chip that we're going to communicate with. It's pretty tiny. I have some ribbon of cable, female to female. I'm going to use these jumper wires to be able to communicate with the chip. So here I'm plugging them to all of the pins that we talked about, and I'm going to need to map these pins to this weird little clothespin thing. This actually has contacts on the bottom that will make contact with the pins of the chip. Now we're going to have to use the flash ROM utility and the command line that comes with the Raspbian OS on this Linux distro that we have here. And I'm running this command here to be able to access it. You can see it found the device. It lists the chip there. That's what we expect from the datasheet. You can see that it ran, and we actually have our dump.bin file, which was the output in the command. So we should now be able to use the standard hexdump utility to read the data from the dump.bin file. So here you see just a bunch of bytes because it's a hex dump, so we see this hex bytes, but we want to look at this in ASCII. So we're going to then use the -C flag with hexdump to be able to see the ASCII on the right hand side. So you can see here there's actually a bunch of plain text stuff, and interestingly enough it looks like there's some sort of 4-digit pin on the bottom. And I actually tried to access the device with the pin, but I didn't know it, so I couldn't enter the device. So I'm going to go ahead just to try it to see if I can put in 2121 and see what happens.
No way. Yeah.
So since there were no actual passwords on the device, it looks like the person never really used it, or they might have deleted them. So I'm going to enter some test passwords and then do this all over again so I can see if we can find those in the dump from the chip. So I go ahead and do the same thing, and we read from the chip. You can see that there's now our dump2.bin that should have my password saved on it. And look at that, we actually have my passwords right above the pin there. So this thing saves all of the data in plain text. So all you have to do is simply dump the information from the chip and you're going to find it here. So I went ahead and deleted it now because I wanted to see if it was actually still there after deleting like the article claimed. So I don't see it down here, but I do still see the pin. When I scroll up to the top, we see it's still there. So even after deletion, it's still on the chip.